Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tarun George. I'm the manager of partnerships at ONFA, and I am glad to welcome you to our webinar today on energy efficiency and net zero projects. We have about 112 people registered, so this is clearly a topic of great interest to you all, and we're glad to have one of our partners, Efficiency Capital, here with us, and they'll be sharing some very valuable content with you as we go. Before we do anything else, though, let's hear a quick acknowledgement of the land that we're on.
We would like to welcome you all to today's session and ground this work by acknowledging and paying respect to the land we are working on today. The site of ONFA's offices in Toronto is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. These lands have been a site of human activity for 15,000 years and are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We know that you are joining us from different parts of the province today and invite you all to acknowledge the territory that you're joining from by sharing in the chat box. As settlers and treaty people, we are grateful for the opportunity to gather and work on this territory, and we approach our work in a spirit of reconciliation.
As you can see from the slide, we've all got a role to play as individuals and organizations and as a housing sector to disrupt colonialism, advance reconciliation. So at ONFA, we encourage you to learn more by reaching out and building relationships with your local friendship center wherever you're located. Next slide, please. Just a few logistics notes for you before we actually start the webinar. Firstly, today's webinar is going to be shared, recorded and provided on demand with all of you who are registered in the coming days right here in the event lobby space. So, you know, if you're struggling to keep up or take notes or anything like that, don't worry. In a couple of days, you'll be able to come back here and it'll be right here in this platform. Also, to keep the audio free and clear, all of your microphones are going to be muted during the presentation portion of the workshop. The way you can interact with Matt, our presenter, is going to be through the Q&A box that's just to the right of your screen. It's not the chat button, it's the Q&A button. Drop your questions in there as he talks, and towards the end, we'll answer all of those questions. If there are questions, we run out of time, we don't have enough time to answer questions, we'll make sure that he gets them and he can engage with you at a later point. Yeah, so do make use of that. Yeah, it'd be great to engage with you at the end. And now I'd like to introduce, next slide, please, our speaker for the webinar today. His name is Matt Zipchen. He's the president of Efficiency Capital. Matt holds a Bachelor of Commerce and a Master of Public Policy, and he has over 2 decades of experience in green building consulting, renewable energy, and sustainable development, as well as energy efficiency financing. Matt is an experienced public speaker. He shared his expertise across many speaking engagements, including Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance's annual conference, Retrofit Canada conference, and Efficiency Capital's own Social Housing Readiness Initiative webinar series. So we're really thrilled to have Matt here, and I'll pass it on to him. Matt.
Thank you, Tarun. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here today. As you heard, Matt Zipchen, president of Efficiency Capital. Background in green buildings, consulting, got sick of writing reports, wanted to learn how to build things, went into renewable energy. That's when I got introduced to using innovative finance for building renewable energy projects, particularly community bonds. And now I'm with Efficiency Capital, building projects and using innovative finance to get those projects done. Leading up to today's presentation, as you heard in my intro, we've done a lot of various presentations for the affordable housing and social housing community, particularly around building the business case for energy efficiency and net zero projects, different funding strategies, how to do the change management that you need to go through with your internal organization to be successful at especially at portfolio-wide retrofits. And chatting with my colleagues in terms of what are the details that we should be presenting here today. Beata, who leads our social housing initiatives, saying that, you know, the high level discussions around strategies or pointing out these different funding sources, most people do that, and when they're chatting with her, that's really the nuts and bolts that they want to know of, like, how did you actually get it done? What were the details? How does the asset management piece fit into scenario planning as it relates to individual retrofit projects? And then also how do you actually mix and match funding was the feedback that I got. So for this presentation, I'll give you a little introduction about us, who we are, what we offer, but then I thought I'd do a deep dive into the case study for Wood Green Community Housing and the work we did with them in our investment partnership, and get into some of the actual details of, normally I present kind of the high level results and what a great project it was and is. But I thought take some screenshots to understand some of the tools and the kind of the process we went through and to build the different scenarios and then build the business case and then get funding for it. Next slide, please. Okay, so quickly who we are. Efficiency Capital, we're developers, investors, and owners of energy efficiency and net zero retrofit projects in other people's buildings. So we partner with the owners of those buildings to flow capital in a variety of different ways to complete retrofits that reduce energy consumption, that does fuel switching to renewable energy, and that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. We were actually incubated by the Atmospheric Fund, formerly Toronto Atmospheric Fund, a regional climate agency that's kind of forwards the energy efficiency and low carbon economy. And the model that we were, that is kind of core to us, that Wood Green took advantage of, it was actually was started by TAF, and then they incubated us to basically grow it past Toronto and across Canada. Since then, we've been involved with a number of foundations, both from a funding point of view and then also from further acceleration of our offering. We have a successful project track record since 2012. We've won a number of awards or recognition on the landscape, which you can kind of see on the right there. And since our launch, we've then established further partnerships, so some funding partnerships. We have funding from TAF and Toronto Foundation and McConnell, but also from Canada Infrastructure Bank to flow low-cost capital into projects. And then we have a number of market relationships for basically going out and originating project and helping building owners kind of do the assessment and get them investment ready. And we have partnerships across Canada to do that. Next slide, please. So this is the why do we do what we do in terms of efficiency capital? Obviously, we're very climate focused, and it seems like net zero is the flavor of the day, and hopefully it will be the flavor of the decade. As you can see, we set some targets as Canada for our buildings in terms of the number of megatons of greenhouse gas emissions that we're supposed to achieve by 2030, or that we're supposed to reduce compared to a 2005 baseline. So we're supposed to go from 84 to 53, and last year we were at 91. So you can see that we're going the wrong way. And a big reason for this is we're not investing enough. Right now across Canada, we probably spend about $6 billion a year on retrofitting our buildings, end of life, other upgrades, not necessarily low carbon retrofits. But for us to decarbonize and move to net zero, estimates range from, we need to be spending 30 to 70 billion per year. So that is a massive increase in the flow of capital that's needed. And building owners, whether you're social housing or whether you're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, actually don't tend to have that capital available for these type of projects. So that's why we exist as a different way to basically get these projects done and to fund them kind of differently than they used to be. Next slide. Now, this challenge of flowing capital and decarbonize is actually particularly acute in the social housing space. First of all, social housing, houses are most vulnerable, and they are also the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, whether that is increase in rising living costs in terms of food and shelter, or just the weather events and increased humidity or hotter at nights. They also, buildings are a key part of Ontario's GHG profile, accounts for 22% of Ontario's GHGs, and buildings are actually the most affordable pathway for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then social housing has a bit of a challenge that they actually represent about 9% of building emissions in Ontario, even though they only account for about 3% of total floor space, which means there's a lot of opportunity there to tackle, but it's not easy. Next slide. So the retrofit problem, the challenge is that, we obviously need to get these retrofits done. We need to flow capital into them, which is the first thing, number one there in terms of investment. But it also takes changes to current business practices, as I mentioned, takes know-how, expertise, dedicated focus and time, and then an ongoing care and practice of monitoring, optimization, and preventative maintenance. And again, social housing is facing some particular challenges in addition to the same challenges that all building owners face, and that is even less capital available for renewal, inability to absorb some of the rising operating costs that we're seeing, and then massive increase in demand and need for their services. Next slide, please. And so the solution that we offer is called Energy as a Service. And the idea is that we flow capital into projects, various forms, whether it's our own, whether it comes from some of our foundation or financial partners, whether it's utility incentives. We find the best kind of sources of capital and then stack it to get projects done. And we flow and do that in the projects themselves. We bring low carbon technology to bear, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's renewable energy. And then the whole thing needs to be underpinned by building an energy data. So all of our projects also bring a modernization lens to a lot of the buildings and digitalization and smart building technologies. So we combine those in a complete turnkey solution that includes kind of the strategic and project assessment up front. We're a long-term partner with skin in the game in the projects. We take on most of the risk, deploy the investment, manage the design and build, and the operation and maintenance of those projects. And then that leads to successful retrofit projects over time, which we can aggregate across portfolios and across jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Clients choose us because we can provide 100% of the capital needed for your projects at below market rates, at longer term lengths. So as we look to move towards a low carbon economy, there's a lot of institutional capital available. However, institutional capital wants to write $50 million checks, and retrofit projects can range from 500 to 3 million. And so that's why we have aggregators and developers like us who can connect with the institutional capital and then deploy that capital in smaller community-sized projects. We fully take on the risk, the performance risk. I've got another slide, so I won't go into the details on the risk that we take, but doing something new is inherently have some more risk, and so it's we're the partner that will take that on, and as I said, have skin in the game and get paid on performance. Biggest challenge we find for even the building owners that do have capital and are willing to take risk is it's complex and it's busy, and people are time constrained. So we are basically an outsourced project team to your operations and your facilities to basically get these projects done. And because we're the outsourced project team that comes with funding, then we can do this at scale as well, whether it's a single building that you have, a portfolio, or across jurisdictions, as I said. Next slide, please. So how we are different, and this kind of represents the evolution of the energy services industry. Previously, or kind of the common way to do retrofits is you have a contractor or a consultant. You either pay for it yourself using your reserves or other types of grants and incentives, or a lender. However, in those situations, you're really the one taking the risk. You implement a new type of heat pump. You're at the risk that it doesn't work, or that it wasn't designed properly, or any of the potential issues involved. Then the energy service companies came along. So the ESCOs, you may be familiar with. These are the Johnson Controls, the Siemens, the Amerescos, and they kind of integrated 3 of those risks into their offering, and that worked really well in a lot of the public sector and in institutional buildings. But they tended not to come down into smaller projects in multifamily residential or even commercial buildings. They tend to like $5 million projects and up. And then the next evolution from energy performance contracting, which is what energy service companies do, is the energy as a service, which is the full transference of risk, the full outsourcing of your energy infrastructure from the funding, from the procurement to the design, build, and operations. And so that's what we are. We're the one-stop shop to do all that. We invest our own capital and are paid on the performance of those projects, whether that performance is the energy savings that we create over time, or the GHG savings, or if it's a pure output model, we could get paid on the kilowatt hours we generate. But the idea is that we're taking the risk on achieving that performance and getting paid for it. Next slide, please. Comprehensive approach. So this is one of the important aspects of doing a retrofit, and a deep retrofit. So traditionally, either from a capital constraint or a time constraint point of view, building owners tend to do one measure at a time. So this year we're going to do our LED lights, maybe spread it over 2 years. Then, we have the boiler coming up. But by doing this, from a financial point of view, you actually miss out on a lot of opportunity to kind of optimize your capital and potentially reduce the amount the projects will actually cost. And so we like to combine basically what we call the fast payback items. So LED lights have tremendous amount of savings, low flow toilets, but those savings, once the capital for those, the installation is paid off, is a stream of savings that can go to pay for your high capital cost items, your boilers, your chillers, your makeup air units. So that's why you want to combine the two to get a better net present value on your projects. And it's a really important concept and aspect for really kind of optimizing the project and your capital stack. Next slide. And then, our business model is fundamentally the same, but we do have 3 different ways we contract with clients. We're still flowing capital into the project. We're still managing risk in some way, depending on the level of risk the client wants to take. And we're still a long-term partner. But we have different ways to basically get paid on performance or to contract with the client. The first one is the Energy Savings Performance Agreement, or ESPA for short. This was the original product that we started with that was launched by TAF. And so this is where the savings that we generate has to pay for the capital that we put in. And so that means that from day one, that the savings are going to be greater than your payments. But it also means that the amount of capital we can flow is kind of is limited by the amount of savings that can be generated. But what's great about this program is that you do have a great good savings opportunity. Those savings, we have a mechanism to have them guaranteed and then insured by a third party as well. So if, again, you're a building owner who is risk adverse and we're putting new technologies that you're not sure of, this product is a great way to de-risk that with the performance guarantees. The other one is more of a, call it an energy lease, because that's kind of most similar to what it's like and what people are used to. This one is not savings guaranteed, and this tends to be for building owners who are a little bit more comfortable taking some of the risk. Maybe they have some experience. This is more, they just want to make sure that it's design certified up front. So that the expected savings are third-party certified, but they're not guaranteed. And then the third one is the complete as a service agreement, which is complete outsourcing, and that's an output-based product. So again, we get paid on the amount of kilowatt hours we generate or kilowatt hours we save, and we're completely in charge of maintenance, repair, refurbishment, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the introduction to us. And so to introduce Wood Green, this was kind of a really great project in the social housing space, and Wood Green was a really great partner. So large social housing provider, over 1,500 units across 19 buildings. They started to recognize that they needed a strategy to address the growing gap. They had this increasing capital needs for their buildings and asset renewal and infrastructure renewal. But at the same time, they had depleting reserve fund dollars, and they're facing a lot of risks from the aging portfolio, aging equipment, and potentially including stock loss of some of the housing portfolio. They also recognize that they lack the internal kind of capacity and capital and expertise to kind of undertake a large scale retrofit across the portfolio, again, that was multi-measures. And so they needed a partner who could both fund and deliver guaranteed outcomes, to also meet their kind of, their mandate as good stewards and to make sure that the outcomes were assured for their community members. Next slide. So they developed a plan, kind of and it has a much longer name than this, but it wouldn't fit on the title. But I just call it the Asset Sustainability Plan, and I think it was that climate change framework in the title as well. And so there was kind of four key aspects to this plan. The first one was, let's get a baseline, let's do some data gathering, let's understand what our actual needs are. So that was a process of building condition assessments, energy audits, capital planning, reserve fund planning. Also layering in any regulatory requirements. So I'm basically going from the dark blue to the light blue over down to the green and kind of clockwise. So then, yeah, layering into the capital needs in the capital plan, any kind of regulatory requirements, in this case, particularly the Ontario Disability Act and accessibility requirements. And that kind of came together in terms of basically a 30-year plan of what was needed to be spent when. And then from there, they were able to kind of go out and look for specific innovative financial solutions. And that's kind of how they found us. And then underpinning the whole thing, it's not just about a single retrofit investment. It's actually about modernizing operations, increasing the capacity and expertise of staff around these new technologies, or how to, improve preventative maintenance procedures, but installing kind of technological support for those new processes, and basically increase the capacity of the entire organization. And then finally, the last piece was, once they've done all that, they recognize that the need is always still greater than the solution. So then the next was to engage in sector-wide advocacy to secure more long-term funding for the sector itself, and to also share the information and the learnings, which is why I'm here today. Next slide. Okay, so sorry for the annoying details on this slide, but I told you I was going to show you the nuts and bolts. So step one was the data gathering. Wood Green managed to secure some upfront grant funding, some in the form of utility incentives from Enbridge and Toronto Hydro. And then there are other kind of audit incentives on the landscape. But this allowed them to undertake portfolio-wide building condition assessments that were then further informed by energy audits. So I'm actually going to walk you through the headings of this because I think it's important to kind of look at what you need to really have a good building condition assessment that you can then run scenarios on. So you can see, if you're familiar with BCAs, some of this, it might be boring to you. If not, then welcome to the fun world of BCAs. So first column is just the various properties. There was 10, I think it was 8 or 10 properties we looked at. They all have different categories of measures you're looking at, interior, exterior, shell, mechanical services. And they look at each one of those, okay, floor finishes, makeup air units, get an overall condition assessment. What is the actual service life of this equipment? What is the actual age? What is the observed age versus actual age? How hard has it been run? The remaining life, the estimated cost to replace it, the year that you plan to replace it in, the type of replacement strategy that you want to pursue. So is this a cyclical renewal? Is it a major repair that needs to happen? Or is it an end of life replacement? And then there was an algorithm that then created a priority sequence based on those inputs. And then we had a switch finally of whether any particular individual measure should be included in an energy project with efficiency capital, which is that little Y and the orange highlight. I wanted to show you this because every time, I want to say like 95% of the cases when we start with a building owner and they send us their building condition assessment, I get a PDF, and at the end of the PDF, in the last 3 to 10 pages, is basically a screenshot of an Excel spreadsheet that has this information, and then a bunch of analysis in the written form. But I can't do anything with that. And the first step I would say in any kind of good asset management planning and scenario forecasting is you've got to have your data in Excel form. And so the very first thing you do is your next building condition assessment. make sure you spec with your consultant that they will give you an Excel spreadsheet with this in it, so you can actually run scenarios. So that to me is a really, really big lesson learned for the sector, is have data that you can manipulate. You can see that black bar at the bottom of that BCA table there. So this was just a screenshot of the Excel tabs that will carry through the presentation, so you can kind of see how we've set up the Excel file for this BCA. So this was the consolidated data set of all measures across all properties. Now, the consolidated data set, though, was also informed by the energy audit. So the second table down below, this is kind of your traditional energy audit, where you will have description of the energy measure. So, control system for boilers, or resident awareness training program. And then by implementing that measure, how many kilowatt hours, how many meters cubed of gas or water can be saved, the cost savings based on a price estimate for that year, which you would then escalate over time. Any incentives available in the marketplace. So your energy auditor will do a scan to say, okay, here's the utility incentives, offset the capital cost, gives you a simple return on investment and a simple payback. That you'll see that in most energy audits. We also added another few columns because we wanted to integrate well with the building condition assessment as well. So when you have a consultant do the building condition assessment, they're really looking at end of life. They're not necessarily looking at performance. So something may not be end of life, but it may be operating at 50%. The energy audit is really what looks at performance, especially if you do an investment grade audit. So once the BCAs were done, we went back to the measures that the energy auditor looked at, and then kind of upgraded the assessment of the recommendation of how important it is, how well it's performing. When do we think the end of year should be compared to the BCA? And then also an evaluation of the measure. Is it just pure for energy savings? Is it an end of life issue, or is it an occupant health and comfort issue? Because those are also really important as well. So this is kind of the setting up of the data. This in itself probably took a year. Again, across 10 buildings, so pretty extensive. But it is quite an extensive data gathering exercise that you have to be prepared for, but it does create the foundation for all your scenario planning going forward. Next slide. So once you have all that, you can then re-aggregate it into the different buildings. And you get, okay, here's our baseline capital expenditures for the next 30 years, somewhere in the $86 million after 30 years, year by year expenditures, building by building. And this was your base pivot table. From there, you can then kind of break up the portfolio into different groups if you want. So again, you can kind of see my Excel, the little pivot table image down there. Well, to the right of it, you can see portfolio 1, portfolio 2, portfolio 3. So those are just different groupings of these buildings where they said, okay, let's kind of remove any building that is not housing. So if there's any office building or in there, a corporate office or services or community infrastructure. Another portfolio, I believe, removed all the Section 78 buildings, and they wanted to look at funding those differently. Or maybe you're grouping them because they have different categories of supported by different reserve funds or something. So had a bunch of different portfolio groupings, and then that kind of set us up to do the scenario modeling. Next slide, please. So the scenario modeling, so the baseline funding scenario. So that baseline capital expenditure for the next 30 years then went into scenario 1, year by year, starting balance of what's my starting balance in my reserve, how much am I planning to contribute annually to that reserve, which is an input variable. Are there any adjustments I am making? So again, just doing a massive withdrawal or a massive input into the reserve. The annual capital needs, that's the expenditures that we just spent the year modeling out. And then where does that leave you at the end of the year? And so you kind of run that for 30 years. And you can see an opening balance of reserves still puts them in the hole about 75 million at the end of 30 years. And it shows them depleting their reserves. So the assumption in your baseline is you're not looking at any other funding. This is just how much money do you have on hand and where are you at the end of it. So you can see that their reserves are depleted in year 3. Next slide, please. So we've done the 30-year analysis. We know where we're at, but there are some immediate needs. There was a number of things, equipment and systems that were starting to fail. At least the repair or maintenance costs were getting overwhelming. And some of the end of life stuff needed to be done. So we went, as part of the energy audit, as I mentioned, was not just saying, here's some energy savings opportunity, let's identify some efficiency, but also end of life and occupant health and comfort. So just from the book value, there was, $2.4 million of deferred maintenance and end of life asset renewal. We identified another $1 million in potential opportunities that if you were just looking at end of life, you would miss, because some things you want to change out before end of life if the savings justify it. And so that's what this other $1 million in upgrades were things like that, the energy efficiency and occupant comfort measures. The issue, so we've got now a $3.4 million project identified of kind of measures that need to get executed in that first 3 to 5 years of that 30-year plan. And there was only about 1.3 million in the bank in terms of reserves. So they partnered with us to kind of say, okay, now that we've evaluated these opportunities, whether it was the low flow toilets or the LED lighting or envelope, and then kind of what kind of change management would need to be put in place. And then it was about us to kind of figure out a capital plan to do this, to try and maximize and meet everyone's needs. Next slide, please. So we are basically the developer. So similar to you buy a house, you put in your down payment, it's your equity contribution, you go borrow the rest, but you still own and operate 100% of that house, even if you only technically paid for 20% of it. Similar idea here is that, we will put 100% of the capital in, but we will pull in other leverage, other lenders, other grant sources. We will manage that process and deploy it all as one capital stack. So the idea is that they chose the Energy Savings Performance Agreement, the ESPA. So we make the investment. We forecast a stream of savings for the next 20 years. We take a portion of those savings. And the portion that we took actually changed every year because with cost escalation on price, we were able to just kind of sculpt our payments over the 20 years to make sure that savings were always greater than the payments that Wood Green had to make. And in terms of the capital stack, we had actually 3 sources of money to get this project done. Wood Green did have some of their reserve that they, was booked to contribute. So we did put some of that into the project. We also secured a long-term low interest loan from the City of Toronto as part of their Better Buildings Partnership. Program still available for those in the City of Toronto. And then, we put in our 20% equity if you're using the, house purchase example. And then you can see from the graph there, for the first 10 years, this is a graph of savings that was generated. Savings are increasing because utility prices go up over time, even though it's volume savings we predict. And then we split those savings for the first 10 years with a portion going to us to repay our capital and a portion to the City of Toronto's long-term loan. This was 10-year money that we were using at the time. So at the end of year 10, we dropped out. And everything, so that's the dark gray bars in the first 10 years on the top half, those disappear, and then all those savings go to Wood Green for the next kind of 20 years after that. Even though this was only modeled for 20 years, the capital plan was for 30. And Wood Green actually set this up so that those savings that they were now earning, they had to set up an accounting because there was a rule that there was potential clawback from the city administrators if they achieve certain savings. So they have to actually get an exemption to that rule and have those savings go back to replenish their reserve contribution. So they set this up so that the savings actually became an income stream at a 4% interest back into their reserve from this energy project. The City of Toronto, as you can see, is the baseline bars, just stable payments all the way through for the first 20 years. Next slide, please. So I'd mentioned that we had worked with the City of Toronto and their Better Buildings Partnership loan program. For those outside of the City of Toronto, I mean, these are kind of like the big, well-known sources of capital. FCM's Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund, CMHC's Co-Investment Fund, and CMHC's MLI Select for mortgage insurance and mortgage financing. So we can actually interact with any of these sources of capital. We can stack them. Some of them, only fund 80% of the project, co-investment up to 95%, and MLI Select depends on the terms. It's really dictated by debt service coverage ratio. But in all of these, there's an equity contribution that you need to make because it won't fund 100% of the project. We can be that equity partner and get paid over time, so that essentially there is no capital needed from the client. The challenge with working with some of these funds is timing. I talked about building owners not having a lot of time and capacity to execute. The same is with a lot of these government organizations. There's been a tremendous amount of demand for these programs, and it takes a while to do the analysis and do the underwriting. So planning early, I wouldn't attempt to go through these programs if you need a retrofit done in the next 4 months, which is coming back to that first step of data gathering and doing your planning and staging it. That's going to become really important as you look to some of these funding sources to understand how long it takes to get back to you, get approval, and get money out the door. We can also play a bridge financing role if those approvals are imminent and get the project started. But there's a challenge then of depending on what's eligible and when the clock starts. But those are details that if you're interested in, Beata can help walk you through. Next slide, please. So from that, we were able then to do a scenario analysis. We had our baseline scenario of, where we're going to be in the next 30 years, minus 75 million. And now we have this investment from City of Toronto and Efficiency Capital and Wood Green. And you can play with some assumptions of like, okay, well, what was the interest rate on the City of Toronto? What is the rate that I want to contribute to my reserves every year? Can I play with that? What are the energy savings, the utility price escalation assumptions, and what is the percentage split that we're sharing with Efficiency Capital every year? So you can play with these different variables to kind of come up with the most realistic, but also the most optimal, basically project funding scenario. Next slide, please. And it actually turned out really great. So with all the measures we did, Wood Green had their 1.3 million in reserves, but we were able to do a $3.4 million project. And that resulted in just under $6 million of energy savings or utility savings, because water and gas, over the next 30 years. But it also improved the reserve fund balance by $6 million in addition to those energy savings. And that's the kind of the difference in those two lines you can see in the bottom graph. And that's simply because if in the baseline scenario, you're planning to replace your boiler in year 5 with your own money, and then all of a sudden Efficiency Capital comes along and we replace it, you no longer have to save for that. And so it changes the amount you have to contribute to your reserve and plays with your end reserve balance. So it's really great because you get the operational savings of energy, but you also get the kind of balance sheet savings on your reserve fund. Now, that's just the start. Now you have an energy savings project. Well, those savings means the value of your building has increased. So one of the things Wood Green was able to do based on the savings, which are verifiable, insured, they're able to then go to their mortgage lender on the refinancing on one of the buildings and actually refinance it at a higher valuation, and then take that extra capital in that refinancing and then add it to their reserve and their capital plan. So they were able to unlock another 20 million in value because of that energy savings, increasing the value of a building and doing a refinancing, which now with the MLI, this was before the MLI Select program. So with the MLI Select program, you could probably unlock even more. Next slide. And here's a nice little picture of an example of a decaying makeup air unit with a hole in it and rusted out to a bright, shiny one. And that's what kind of all the equipment we replaced, kind of the state of it was and where it ended up. And next slide. And I think that's my 40-minute presentation. So yeah, again, Matt Zipchen, president, but Beata is our go-to lead in the social housing and affordable housing space. If you have any questions, want to know more details, curious about how to get started, or have some specific projects you want to talk about, please reach out to her. And again, I think as Taryn said, you'll have access to this presentation and this contact information for a little while yet.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate all the information. And we've got a couple of questions coming in, and I'll just remind all of you tuning in, if you do have other questions you'd like to submit, again, it's the Q&A tab just to the right of your screen. You click that, enter your question, and we'll see it on this end, and I'll be able to ask Matt. Okay, so a couple of questions for you, Matt. First one is probably pretty straightforward. The question is what you've shared relevant to new construction projects, or is this all about existing assets?
No, this is relevant. It's a slightly different model, but similar for new construction. So in new construction, I would call it a micro utility model, which you kind of see the most common with the geothermal providers. So the idea is, if you were just do a new construction yourself, you've got your full construction budget, of which includes electrical, mechanical portion. What you can do is you can partner with somebody like us, or there are other on the landscape, that we would come in and we would create a micro utility. So maybe we put in a geothermal field, maybe we put in rooftop solar. But the idea is that your electrical mechanical budget that you had planned, we take that over. We make that investment. And in exchange, you have a 25, 30-year utility agreement with us. So similar to you, a long-term power purchase agreement, or just like buying electricity from Toronto Hydro, we would have a similar arrangement saying, hey, we're going to sell you kilowatt hours or BTUs at this price, escalating at this fixed amount for the next 30 years. So it is, there's a couple of new projects. Dream has done one of those with their Zibi, I think is how you pronounce it, in Ottawa. A couple of really great examples. Really great way to go for deeper green buildings, because as a developer and builder, you're really limited in budget, and those budgets get stressed as you go through change orders. So the ability to pay more capital up front, if you're not sure how you're going to get it back over time, is really difficult. Whereas you bring in a specialized partner who can do a micro utility, they will look at the ideal investments, whether it is low flow digital fixtures, whether they can do a lot of the extra bells and whistles within the building, because they actually have an incentive to conserve that energy because they're getting paid on it.
Okay, perfect. Let's see, next question here. Okay, so the case study that you used of Wood Green, that's great, but they're a pretty large organization. Does it change anything if we just have, if we're a small organization, we just have a small, one small building? How do things change?
They become less onerous in terms of the amount of data collection. I would say the methodology stays the same. The methodology of get some really great baseline data. Like one of the things that energy efficiency, net zero, green buildings, it requires looking at things at the asset level, whereas previously people just kind of looked at the building levels and managed assets as they came end of life. Now it is about managing them for performance and optimization, not just end of life. So even if you're just one building, it is about getting a really good understanding of how that building is operating, and whether your equipment is not just end of life, but is it actually operating at 50% or 80%, and what the opportunities are around that. You still want to take the strategy of adding as much digital infrastructure as possible, sensors to understand occupant comfort of temperature, but also for indoor air quality. One of the greatest benefits that green buildings provide is actually better ventilation, better air quality, and that reduces doctor visits, absenteeism, a whole bunch of actual real important social and health outcomes by indoor air quality, yet nobody has sensors really monitoring it other than CO2. So the same strategies of get a good baseline using BCAs and energy audits, make sure you get that data in Excel spreadsheet, and then do some forward scenario planning. That's the same. The difference, I think, now comes with your capital availability. Working with a third party like us, we do add, like, we do take on risk. We do add some of the cost because of that. And that means that we also do need to see a minimum project size. So there's some funding sources that are better suited if you're just a single building with a $200,000 project versus a large building with a $2 million project. The sources of capital might change a little bit, but the process is still the same.
Actually, just to follow up to that question, I think a number of people are asking about the same thing. So it could work for smaller providers, just have one building, but is there a minimum size requirement for you guys or for projects like this?
Yeah, so for us, we like to make a $500,000 investment as kind of our minimum. And so if you're doing one measure, chances are that's not a $500,000 investment. If you're doing a deep retrofit, chances are it is. One of our first projects was Scarborough Heights Co-op, and that is one building. I mean, it is a larger building; it's about 100 units, but that was $1 million investment, and that was mainly mechanical. What you'll find is that if you can combine your harder deep infrastructure, so not just your mechanical systems, but now you're talking envelope, now you're talking windows, now you're talking cladding, or all of those are actually quite expensive. So even a small building of 30 to 50 units, if you're doing envelope, you can easily get to that 500,000. The other piece too is if you just have tiny small buildings, but you've got a number of them. Like for us, the $500,000 investment is a contract value. As long as we have that size of relationship with you, like we're working with a provider in New Brunswick that has, I believe, 15 or 20 6-unit buildings, all kind of in the same area, same region. For us, that's one investment.
Got it. That's helpful to know. So it's the 500,000 is a combined value of one engagement. Okay.
But again, I'm just going to reiterate, that's why it's so important to have this data in Excel spreadsheets so that you can say, oh, you know what, I'm going to turn this on, turn this off. I'm going to use these measures and not, and then that gives me, and then that also, that spreadsheet will tell you if I bundle these measures, what is my energy savings? What is my GHG savings? That also informs you, can I go after this source of capital that has a minimum 25% energy savings? That is just a planning exercise. And even if you're a small housing provider, there's usually enough work to be done.
Got it. Several questions here about the Wood Green project. So they're curious about the time frame of the whole thing. So from the beginning, selling the concept, getting the contract, starting the work, gathering the data, from beginning to end, what was that time frame like?
2.5 years, I want to say.
Okay.
So construction itself would have been 6 to 8 months, but there was a little, but we kind of had to go through a heating season. So it was kind of, we had to pause for some of that during the heatings during the winter, but generally that's 6 to 8 months of construction. The data gathering of building condition assessments and energy audits, that probably took another 8 months. And so what, you're at 1.5 years there. And then the rest of the time was actually a lot of internal change management and decision making. Partnering with a private sector third party. I've never done this model. Who the heck is Efficiency Capital? How do we develop a trust with each other, considering that we're going to be in a relationship for 10 years? And then, how do we bring this level of analysis that we're not used to, and then verify it with our various committees, and then get board input. So the thing about one of the benefits of having a smaller organization is your decision making can be a little bit faster. So you wouldn't have to do 2.5 years. But I would say start to finish, if you already have the planning in place in terms of you've got a good BCA, all you need to do is energy audits and then do your capital optimization. You could probably get a project done in 8 to 14 months.
Okay. Matt, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what some of that internal work looks like. So what are the processes, the knowledge, the change management, what kind of knowledge internally do they need to have? Maybe you could flesh that out a bit.
Yeah, so I mean, and we could probably do a whole separate webinar on change management and processes. So at the strategic level, it was more around this partnership and getting comfortable around the terms of the partnership. At the procurement level, so we are now doing procurement, not the housing owner. So integrating procurement policies and procurement requirements. So there's a bit of change about how, but they're also still a funder of the project, so they're still involved in the procurement. So a little bit of a different way of doing procurement, because I mean, traditionally you may just go get 3 quotes for every measure. However, if you're having one party who's going to guarantee the performance of those measures, it's now another lens of when you're getting quotes, it's not just about cost now, it's actually about performance and longevity and evidence in the field of this measure or this technology working. So you do have to kind of change your procurement approach sometimes. So that was another one. The asset management planning, like they had never really done this kind of 30-year asset management planning. So from a planning exercise and then integrating that into their kind of operational side, so their property management and their maintenance. So in addition to like making sure, again, because we're not just managing for end of life, we're managing for performance. So things kind of stop performing as well over time, things change. So you always want to go through a recommissioning. You always want to make sure that all of the regular manufacturers suggested maintenance, so change the filter on this month, on this day, and all that. And so we put in together a preventative maintenance program where each of the, and this was particular to one of the providers we were using, but they have a basically QR code stickers that they would put on all of the equipment and a little iPad that you go around, and then just created some training for the maintenance staff to kind of like how to use this QR swipe. Okay, here's the plan. When the filter needs to change, what kind of filter, what needs to happen, and check it's been done. Because one of the things about getting a performance guarantee, the guarantee goes away if you can't prove you've been maintaining it. So now you have to have a body of evidence that you have been maintaining it a certain way. So now you're adding a layer of kind of, preventative maintenance that can be verified. And the easiest way to do that without really being a pain or adding too much cost or time is with a technology solution. The other part is the smart data. Like we have sensors all over the place monitoring energy performance and kind of how the building's doing. We're doing regular reporting on that, quarterly for the first 2 years and then annually after that. Accounting systems needed to change a little bit. So they couldn't just have, because they were getting specialized investment related to energy savings, we had to make sure that the accounting system was set up to show, here's how much you were spending on your utility before, here's how much you're spending now, but let's actually like capture that savings expectations to make sure that it all pencils out. And again, they have to go get a special exempt from the city of Toronto to make sure none of those savings were clawed back. So there's a little bit of an accounting process change, a reporting process, how we dealt with some of the HST, how we dealt with whether we were classified as on or off balance sheet on the reporting. So there was like nothing crazy in terms of change, but there was just like little tweaks in all their processes. There's just a little bit of a different lens you have to bring to bear.
Yeah. Well,
so sorry if I went down a rabbit hole there.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. This is an interesting one. Who was the Wood Green CFO at the time? I assume they were aware of it.
So we went through 3 CFOs, but I swear it wasn't us who burnt them out. For the approval process, it was Zool at the time, and yeah, we like any of this has to be really like your treasurer or your CFO. They really have to be intimately involved because this really is a financial investment that just has technical aspects. But yeah, that was a big piece too. He actually was really excited to be part of it. We've got some great quotes of support from him. He learned a lot, and yeah, really big supporter of the project.
Got it.
Oh,
okay.
change management. internal champions at the high level, critical. Project's not going anywhere without internal champions at the high level.
Good to know. Okay, very quickly, Matt, just one last question. How can you talk more about how you guys get paid? I think I remember you guys had you had a contract structures slide in your presentation. Maybe just real quick.
Yeah, so if we based on investment grade audit as opposed to a level 2 means that there's a certain level of accuracy brought to bear, so that you're saying, hey, if there's going to be $100,000 of savings, there's a 95% chance there will be $100,000 worth of savings, and then we're going to go get that insured. So out of that $100,000 savings in year 2, that's $103 with 3% inflation, 100,030, whatever. And so you have kind of amount of savings that you're expected to earn over the next 10 to 20 years. And then we were taking a portion of that. So in year 1, it might have been, I can't remember what the exact proportion was. It was somewhere maybe around 48 or 50%.
So
and then
a percentage of the savings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And and I know we're getting close on time. The way that works on an annual level is we just predict the savings for the future year. You pay us that flat rate per month, and then at the end of the year, there's a true up based on actual savings.
Got it. Okay, wonderful. If any of you have additional questions, we'll post a couple of contact information from Efficiency Capital. I believe it's Beata in the chat. And as well as I mentioned, all this information will be available on this platform. But we'll just have a couple last slides to close out this presentation. Sarah, if you could bring those up. Perfect. So as you all know, the ONFA conference is coming up October 26th to the 28th. We have a weekly conference planning meeting. I was informed this morning that we are almost sold out for the conference. So really, if you have any intention of attending this conference, do register. Registration will be open just for a little longer while we still have spots. So yeah, make sure you do that. Again, it's conference.onfa.on.ca. Next slide, please. All right. As mentioned, as we always have, right after this webinar closes, you'll be sent a post-webinar survey. Please do fill that out. We really use your feedback to create new webinars and new offerings in the future. So it's very important that we hear from you. Next slide, please. And of course, connect with us on all of these channels on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well. You can always reach us with that contact information. We're here for you. And again, if you've registered for this event, for this webinar, you'll get a link sent to you by email, and you'll be able to access all the content through the event mobile platform. And so with that, we'll close. Thank you again, Matt. Really appreciate you being here with us. And thank you all for joining us as well. Have a great day.